Okay, so let's see, we got bill number 1.
Now, let me just get it, bathe in your crowning here.
Feels good.
Were you able to get an angle?
So we got an investment on pencils. I can't tell the difference between this one and the one Ronald used.
Jesse.
Lieutenant Governor says I need more letters in my name.
Done.
Can't help with all the bills.
So just for the record, that was, which one did you just sign?
So this first one was our, this is the budget bill. Where is mine? I don't want to drop it.
It's only 1,100.
Yeah, there you go. 10 revenue.
That's the 15. That was your word and your word. This is your word.
Yeah.
That was 1,500.
This is two.
Which bill is this? This bill. McMary.
This is the bent bill and the revenue bill.
Yay.
Did you get one, Dave? Dave looks good. Peller?
I'm getting a picture for a request. Here?
Gabby.
Abby.
Abby?
Can we send one to Ronald?
I'll have one.
Greg? Can we send one to Ronald? Because he's probably more responsible for this than anybody.
I can send him one of his back. Wow. How many letters are there in JB is what I'm wondering.
I think you're using a period.
The world's biggest period.
How long have you guys had?
How many more do we need to get there?
The whole crew, this whole side.
Did not remember the last name. Did remember the first name.
Not with the flat.
Oh, no, it's just behind this. Which one? No, behind this. This one's $10,000. You got one?
I got one, thank you.
Did Dan get one? Rabbit? Rabbit? Did you get one? Rabbit? Come. Okay. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, he got it.
This is the fair tax rates bill.
There's one over here.
Yep, I will. Back to the podium. Yeah.
We're just gonna get as hot in here as it was.
I don't want to do that, brother. You can take my place if you like.
Reverend, I can't stop
So I'm sorry it's so warm in here. Maybe this will all convince you that we do in fact need to sell the James R. Thompson Center. We're all standing here today because this is a watershed moment for Illinois. And it took so many people to get us here. Democrats and Republicans, elected officials and engaged citizens. There are far too many people to thank. There's simply no way to enumerate the many contributions of all of those who stand behind me, but they were all critical to achieving these successes. Today, I'd like to single out just a few of those who led the efforts on the specific bills that I'll be signing here. Leader Greg Harris and Senator Heather Staines, your steadfast leadership and your responsible approach to balancing the budget made you critical shepherds of the effort to cross the finish line and get it right. Senator Hutchinson and Representative Zaleski. Yep. There could not have been better advocates to have ushered through the fair tax rates bill. And William McNary, your dedication over the many years that it took to get here is truly unrivaled. When I took office 5 months ago, I laid out an ambitious agenda for the people of Illinois. It was an agenda that sought to put state government back on the side of working families by raising wages and creating jobs, by investing in the critical human services that make us strong, and by restoring fiscal stability after years of crisis. Today, I'm proud to say that we made real progress with one of the most consequential and transformative legislative sessions in our state's history. Guided by a vision of an Illinois whose best days are ahead, I worked with the General Assembly, and we came together to think big and get big things done. We gave 1.4 million Illinoisans a raise. We expanded apprenticeships for our young people. We made college more affordable. We protected women's reproductive health.
Yes.
We legalized adult use cannabis and sports betting. We expanded broadband internet service. I'm going to cut you short. We invested in innovation and job creation, and we launched the largest plan in Illinois history to rebuild our roads and our bridges, our universities, and our communities. We did all of that and much more. And I'm grateful to the leaders and members of the General Assembly, especially those standing behind me today, who came together to make this session a truly historic one. But perhaps the greatest unmitigated success is that we achieved something that has eluded state government for decades. We passed a real balanced budget.
Yeah.
Just a few years ago, simply passing a budget was considered nearly impossible. And for years before that, the budget included gimmicks and tricks and was balanced in name only. Those days are over. That this budget is balanced and bipartisan demonstrates just how far we've come. A new era of fiscal responsibility has arrived in Illinois. This budget balances expenditures with revenues, while making consequential investments for working families, for our communities, and for our future. We're making historic investments in education, expanding early childhood education, and bringing our evidence-based funding model to record levels. We're making college more affordable by expanding merit-based scholarships and college tuition grants to 15,000 additional students. And after years of cuts and crisis, our public universities and our community colleges are being rejuvenated. After being hollowed out for the last few years, the basic functions of government, to stand up for the most vulnerable and serve the needs of children, seniors, and families, are being restored. DCFS alone will be able to hire more than 300 new frontline workers. Yep, and we're prioritizing public safety with a focus on violence interruption and youth summer jobs programs, 2 new state police cadet classes, a new conservation police class, and new resources to reduce forensics and rape kit backlogs and manage the gun dealer licensing program. This budget makes important strides toward restoring services that Illinoisans need most and toward stabilizing state government finances. We were prudent and cautious about the investments that we made, with an emphasis on economic growth and jobs, while making sure that Illinois is living within its means, demonstrating that a progressive, forward-thinking vision is in perfect harmony with fiscal responsibility. And with a $150 million surplus, we will be able to dedicate those revenues to the monumental task of tackling our enormous bill backlog. Our effort to restore firm fiscal footing for Illinois continues in November of 2020, when voters will have the power to say yes to a fair tax system that will improve the trajectory of our state's finances forever. They will have an opportunity to vote to make sure that 97% of Illinoisans pay the same or less in income taxes, and they will have a vote on eliminating the budget deficit, paying down our bills, and reducing our pension liability. When Illinoisans vote on this constitutional amendment, they will know exactly what they are voting for, thanks to the rates legislation passed by the General Assembly. This legislation, which I'm about to sign, asks the wealthiest 3% to pay a little bit more, people like me, while the middle class and working class will pay the same or less. And if you want to see for yourself, just go to www.illinois.gov/fair tax calculator. The fair tax is necessary to ensure that we move toward permanently balancing our budgets. Opponents won't tell you that they would make us choose between much worse alternatives. They would substantially cut the very things that make us strong: education, public safety, childcare, and services for veterans and our seniors. Or they would materially raise our flat income tax rate, forcing the middle class, those striving to get there, and everyone else to pay more, 20% more. Or we can reject their alternatives and instead choose the fair tax. In signing this budget and the fair tax legislation today, I choose fiscal responsibility and fairness.
Fan, that's right.
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering what hard pledge you can make today
Yep.
that real property tax relief is coming.
Well, I said for 2 years on the campaign trail that if you really want to lower property taxes, one of the things you need to do is make sure you fund schools properly. People talk about a property tax freeze or lowering property taxes, but then they don't tell you how they're going to pay for schools. I've told you how I'll pay for schools, and we're increasing funding in the evidence-based funding model, as you saw, not just by the required $350 million, but an additional $25 million. But the fair tax will also allow us to increase funding into education, which then in turn allows us to turn back to the local schools and ask them to see that the state is paying more into schools and that they in turn can lower or freeze property taxes. But let me say another thing, that property taxes are made up of a number of lines. One of them is infrastructure. And you saw that we passed a major infrastructure plan that includes big funding for local municipalities to help them pay for their infrastructure. So when you add those two things together, our goal of funding schools properly at the state level, where, as you know, we're second to last today in Illinois in state funding for education. If we can raise that up, we can lower the burden on local property taxes, and as we fund infrastructure for local governments, it gives them the opportunity to lower property taxes. But this task force has other good ideas, and we're going to be listening to those, working with that task force, and by the end of the year, they will issue ideas and recommendations, and then we'll go forward in the next session, hopefully with both administrative changes that we might be able to make at state government as well as legislative.
Governor, there's a lot of talk about bipartisan.
Resurgence issued a statement in the last few minutes that was emailed out that says Democrats will continue to come back year after year and pickpocket more money from Illinois families and businesses, and that Illinois families should not trust what's being promised, puts it in quotes, as the rates today.
Well, first thing I'd say is I was pleased to have bipartisan support for this budget, bipartisan support for the infrastructure projects that we're going to be doing all over the state, and for the bills and the revenue that goes with it. And I was pleased to work with Leader Durkin on some of the tax credits that he wanted for some businesses in the state. And that, of course, takes away from dollars that you can put into other programs for people across the state, but I thought they were worthy for job creation. And, you know, that's a form of spending also when you give tax credits. So, look, we're going to work together going forward. I realize that this is we're once again going to be in a political season where people are, you know, telling untruths about the fair tax. But the fact is that we're going to nevertheless work across the aisle to get things done in this state together. And I was pleased that we had a bipartisan, truly bipartisan, with bicameral support, balanced budget, a real balanced budget that included the votes of many Republicans.
Were any Republicans invited to come today?
As you know, we had a press conference in Springfield. It was much easier for many of them to join us there. Anybody's invited, but the fact is that I was pleased that the leaders of the efforts around the fair tax and my budget proposals are here with me today.
Governor, there's a lot of spending in this budget, there's a lot of big projects. This is your first session. Do you think there should be more transparency about the way this all goes down? Like, it's June 5th and we're just kind of getting numbers trickling in about a lot of projects. Do you think that should be done differently?
Well, as you know, we had bipartisan working groups for months and months working on various aspects of this bill. There's nothing that's a surprise to people. The truth is that everything was talked about across the aisle, and we're pleased with the results of this budget.
Governor, do you think, you said the budget is fully funded in terms of the
the $8.4 million,
9.1.
is it 9.1
Yes, it is.
billion dollars?
Yep.
But as you know, generally acceptable actuarial accounting principles say you would be paying something like 13 billion, because they would say your payment, good as it might be, like Rauner before, like Quinn before, doesn't even cover the interest. You would need another 4 billion to sort of cover the principal and start reducing that $200 billion unfunded pensions. What do you say to those actuaries?
Well, what I would say, first of all, is that we're paying the full payment that is required under the ramp that was put in place in 1995. The statutory required payment. And as you know, that ramp takes us to 2045, where we will be paying roughly $19 billion in that year if we don't do something between now and then to bend that cost curve. It's important to me that we address pensions. And I said, at my first press conference after the legislative session, that there are two things that we, haven't addressed in significant fashion that I would like to go after. One of them is property taxes. One of them is pensions. Now, I'm not talking about lowering, taking away people's pensions. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about managing our pension system better, making sure that we can actually pay people the pensions that are owed to them. And as you know, there are a number of things that we can do, and I put forward a task force that's looking now and delivering to me recommendations about assets that we can transfer into the pension system so that we can better able to manage our net pension liability, which we all want to reduce. And there are other ideas that we put forward. So I think these are all things that we're going to be addressing together over the next several years.
Governor, there's going to be a PR campaign to fight this between now and November 2020. What kind of effort are you going to put in to convincing voters, and how confident are you that they will support this with the 60% rule?
I feel very confident that the public understands the importance of instituting a fair tax in the state of Illinois. That the fact that people who are wealthier can afford to pay it, people like me should step up to the plate, and that we ought to give some tax relief or at least maintain for middle class and working class people across this state. I said this for 2 years on the campaign trail, how important it is that we alleviate the burden on people across the state, middle class people who have been put upon. Their wages, roughly speaking, have been stagnant. The cost of health care for them has gone up. The cost of sending their kids to college has gone up. We need to change the trajectory for the middle class and those striving to get there, and we're doing it. We began to do it this year. There's much more work ahead.
What do you say to the folks who are going to see maybe a break on their income tax, but that's all going to be eaten up by higher gas taxes and other taxes?
Well, I would say that the infrastructure bill allows us to invest in things that will save people money in the long run. For example, and create jobs. Let me be clear. We're going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs as a result of this infrastructure bill. But remember, when you drive to work and you hit all those potholes and then you get a flat tire, that costs you money. When you drive to work and you hit the potholes and now you need to go have your steering realigned and you need to have your car fixed because of it, that costs you money. When the rail system, when our mass transit system isn't operating properly and you can't get to work, that costs you money. So we're investing in the things that really matter in this state. It's been almost 20 years. I realize people look back and say there was a capital bill 10 years ago, but it got truncated halfway through, as you remember, by the prior governor. The fact is that many of these things haven't been addressed for 20 years, and we run an infrastructure deficit every single year in this state. So, there's a recommendation that we invest in infrastructure of a couple of $2 billion more than we actually are able to allocate in our budget. And so this helps us catch up on that, on the life safety aspects of infrastructure that are so important, and then helps us invest in forward thinking in economic growth and job creation, attracting businesses to our state. They want solid, good infrastructure in our state. We have many businesses that rely upon it. We're doing that now with Rebuild Illinois. Thank you all very much. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever. Senator, thank you.